So hello everyone. This is already the 7th webinar of our series of joint events sharing context between cultures. So the events that were organized by TESOL-Italy and TESOL Ukraine. And I am giving the virtual microphone to Maria Grazia Maglioni, the president of TESOL-Italy.
Thank you, Marina. We are very, very honored today to have as a special keynote speaker, Professor Kohn, whom I would like to thank for being here today. Just some news about this Professor Emeritus of English and Applied Linguistics at the University of Tübingen in Germany. His professional interests include intercultural communication and foreign language learning, virtual exchange and telecollaboration, English as a pedagogical lingua franca, and foreign language teacher education. Recent publications include a pedagogical lingua franca approach, emancipating the foreign language learner, global Englishes, and the pedagogical challenge of developing one's own voice. Today, Professor Kohn is going to engage all of us in an interesting workshop titled My English, Empowering Foreign Language Learners to Make the Target. So, join me in welcoming Professor Kohn. And Kurt, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much for your kind words, Maria Grazia. The honor is all mine. I'm really happy to be here and be with all of you. And I mean, before we start with the slides and everything, I think I would like to say that, yeah, it would be my wish and my dream if we could make things a bit more interactive. I don't know, Marina, will you check the chat? So if people have questions, because I think when I share my screen, I won't be able. Oh yeah, I can see the chat, so I think I can see it. But then it might be I might get lost. So, but then I mean, I have a weakness, as you will notice soon. When I start talking, it's sometimes difficult to stop me. I always like to enjoy talking about these issues, global Englishes, ELF, and the pedagogical implications, and all these things. But I think it will be important for you to step in and with your comments and your remarks, your questions, your suggestions, whatever. So I will try to make room for it, but please push for it, okay? It will be better if we can keep it, make it interactive. So I will share my screen now. Here we go. Okay, I have to. Okay, so here it is. Yes, so it's My English, Empowering Foreign Language Learners to Make the Target Language Their Own. This is very close to my heart, and I believe that we in ELT, we need to go in this direction. If we want to open up ELT, to embrace the challenges of global Englishes and global English communication and ELT communication around the world. You have a basis here in what I talk about. Most of it I discuss in this article here, which appeared recently in Asian Englishes. I have all my references throughout the slides, right on the slides. So if you wish to keep track, then keep your smartphones ready and you can take a picture and then you have all the references, okay? So, Mhm. Oh, the slides don't move. Ah. Okay, so here we have the global spread of English and what it means for English language teaching. There are a few things, I think, where we certainly agree with each other. And this is that English has emerged as a global language around the world for international and transcultural communication in a wide range of purposes, from leisure to business to education to culture. And we are part of it now with this event. And I think we also agree that this presents a huge, this change in global English communication presents a huge challenge for ELT, that is, for preparing our students for this kind of world of communication, and also, of course, preparing our teachers for this kind of teaching. But do we agree on how ELT should respond to this challenge? On the one hand, we have potentially conflicting views here. On the one hand, we have ELT with its traditional and firm, some would say stubborn, orientations towards standard English as the language taught. And we have pedagogical researchers and pedagogues with a background in global Englishes and English as a lingua franca, who call for liberating students from, I think you all need to close your microphones, because otherwise we have disturbing background noises. So with their call for liberating students from the normative constraints of ELT's orientation towards standard English. And how can this be done? By raising teachers' and students' awareness of the characteristics and complexities of global Englishes and ELF communication. This is pretty much the state of the art. And I will give you a few quotes to support this. The global spread of English and the changing social linguistic landscape call for a paradigm shift in TESOL curricula to address the mismatch. Yes, the mismatch between what is taught in the classroom and how English functions outside the classroom. And Nikos Sefakis, what ELF users know and how they interact, that is what they do out there in ELF communication, should inform lesson plans, should inform teacher training curricula, textbooks, policies, and assessment procedures in ways that will render the ELT experience richer and deeper and closer to a realistic experience of what has come to be global communication via English. And Kryszkowiak and Lowy, I have the feeling, go a step further. They talk about moving from teaching English as a foreign language to teaching English as a lingua franca. According to their argumentation, teaching ELF should focus on raising our students' awareness that conformity with native speaker norms is not always the most desirable goal, and exposing them to a wide range of language models to prepare them for the diversity of Englishes outside the class. Well, this seems to suggest that ELT's standard English orientation is not appropriate, is not up to the task. And that we need to look at how people communicate under global Englishes and ELF conditions in order to remediate the scene. I would like to propose an alternative perspective, which might be more of a complementary perspective. Later we can discuss whether to what extent it is complementary or alternative, or maybe both. And that is, includes a focus on the speaker learners themselves. That is, I would like to move the focus away from looking at global Englishes and ELF communication out there to looking at speaker learners themselves, our students themselves. There are a few observations and insights I would like to start from. The first observation concerns standard English versus global Englishes or ELF. I have the feeling that we have a kind of paradoxical situation here. Obviously, like today here, speakers of all kinds of Englishes participate quite successfully in global Englishes and ELF interactions. And by the way, all critics of ELT's focus on standard English have a high standard English proficiency themselves. They're either native speakers or they are highly advanced non-native speakers of English. So obviously, ELT's orientation towards standard English cannot be the problem. Otherwise, it wouldn't be possible for people, and not only English teachers, but for other speakers of English from around the world to communicate with each other quite successfully under these global Englishes and ELF conditions. But there is something wrong with ELT. But what is it if it is not its standard English orientation? Now, another input, observation and insight comes from translanguaging, which proposes a new pedagogical paradigm. The context is bilingual education, and translanguaging pedagogy emphasizes that it is important to liberate bilingual students from the post-colonial dominance of standard English. That is, that it is necessary to enable them to make use of all their resources, all their language resources, and not just be limited, restricted to using standard English, which would be a disadvantage, educational and social disadvantage for them. So liberating bilingual students from the dominance of standard English as an educational language. And this is meant to ensure educational and social justice by allowing and enabling them to draw on the entire range of their non-linguistic resources for meaning making as a unitary repertoire. I take from this new pedagogical paradigm this focus on the speaker learners themselves and their resources and their capabilities as speaker learners. And I would like to pursue our topic of how we can make ELT ready for the challenges of global Englishes, or preparing students for global Englishes communication and ELF communication, I would like to start from this perspective and pursue this perspective, this focus on our students as speaker learners and their resources and capabilities. I would like to pursue this further. My leading assumption is the following. Successful global English's ELF communication has its deep roots in successful communication in general. I think this is, for me, the explanation why it is possible for speakers of any kind of English, and whether native or second or foreign language speakers, and even on different levels of proficiency, to communicate successfully under ELF and global English's conditions. So in order to understand successful GE-ELF communication and the competence or competencies it requires, we need to understand these roots, both from a communication and language learning perspective. This is what I'm going to talk about now, a normalizing look at global English's ELF communication, and in the second section, my English and the global English's ELF future of EOT. I would like to briefly pause here. If there are any questions or comments, and we could pick them up. Because this is a kind of shift compared to what you find in the literature these days on these issues of global English's pedagogy or ELF pedagogy. Okay, so it's possible for you to write short questions or comments in the chat, and I'm even able to see it, and then we could pick up some things from there. But now I will continue with normalizing. Yes, I think there are too many microphones open. So Roberto just said, yes, the problem is that traditional textbooks are always focused on standard English and they make no hints at GE-ELF. But this isn't this again, I mean, the focus I wanted to shift away from? I mean, certainly, I mean, what you have in the textbooks is essential. And I think we can come back later to this issue of in what ways textbooks would need to change. Yes, abolish textbooks. Yes. Isn't it about language acquisition? Yes. I will come to language acquisition. Right. Mm-hmm. That's a very important point. So I will discuss my approach, or say more theoretical conceptual approach, both with regard to communication and learning or acquisition. So first I will start with acquisition, with communication. That is it would be interesting to know how sub-English forms will develop, such as less academic. Yeah, well, I think this is a very good point. We'll come to this, and I think I have an answer for this. But mind you, all my answers are not answers in the sense of pedagogical recipes, but rather on a more theoretical conceptual level, which but then might get you hopefully started making up your own mind concerning solving these issues for yourself and your particular context and teaching situation. So let's talk about normalizing GE-ELF communication. In global Englishes and ELF communication, speaker learners, we said, are able to communicate with each other. And my argument is that they are able to do this because they build on their ordinary communicative capability. Communicative capability, a concept taken from Henry Widdowson. What are the quality features of speaker learners' ordinary communicative capability? And to what extent are they suitable for handling global Englishes and ELF-related problems? So first of all, we need to see that in communicative processing, speakers are and can be extremely creative. They usually are very strategic in the sense of they do something not just because there is an algorithm behind it all, but they do it in order to reach a certain goal, in order to convey certain intentions. There's inferential processing, and in a minute I will say a few more words on inferential processing. Again, when we understand each other, like now, we don't do this because we apply rules in an algorithm way. We do it in a strategic way. We create inferences with the help of our background knowledge and our contextual knowledge. Otherwise, communication wouldn't be possible. This only works to the extent that we are cooperative and assume that the other person is cooperative. And what is more, being empathetic, having empathetic rapport with one's communication partners greatly boosts our sense of cooperativity. And we monitor continuously what we are doing, whether it's, and to the extent to which it fits our own requirements of communicative and communal success. Our requirements of communicative and communal success are beacons of orientation and guidance throughout all these processes of communication based on these features I just mentioned. Let's take a closer look at these personal requirements of communicative and communal. I want to be part of a certain group, of communal success. Well, there is, of course, expressing intended meanings, being understood, understanding others. But there is more. I want to speak like members of a certain community. I want to engage in translanguaging or languaging within and beyond my own English. That is, I want to go beyond my limits. I want to ensure cooperative and empathetic rapport. I meet external requirements, like, for instance, learning objectives, or requirements my communication partners entertain. But these external requirements can only have an effect on my own communicative performance and behavior to the extent that I, again, have made them my own, kind of internalized them in a certain way. We come back to these things. All these issues around personal requirements of communicative and communal success, well, this is a speaker internal perspective. These are not the requirements from the outside. It's speaker-learner's perspective. And these, my requirements as a speaker-learner are the driving force for what I am doing. And are also provide the criteria against which I measure, so to speak, my speaker satisfaction. And more often than not, other people might be satisfied with the way I communicate, but I am not satisfied with how I communicate. Why? Because I know what I want to achieve. You can't know it. I know it. And that is why I am not satisfied, or in other situations, why I am satisfied, although you are not satisfied. So let's take a look at a few of these features of quality features of communicative capability. Creativity. Trusting one's own creativity is essential. Take Henry Whittlerson's quote, "You are proficient in a language to the extent that you possess it. Make it your own, bend it to your will, assert yourself through it, rather than simply submit to the dictates of its form." So in a way, proficiency only comes with non-conformity, that is, not conforming to a certain input. When you can take the initiative, you take the initiative and strike out on your own. Well, and here you see, I mean, this is something, it's very powerful. And it could mean anything, striking out on your own. But there are these requirements of communicative and communal success, my own requirements, that provide guidance and orientation for me. Now let's take a look at inferential discourse processing, another very essential quality feature of a communicative capability, and first from a comprehension perspective. There's a sound in the background. Close your mics. So this maybe, yeah. Okay, yes, there's a central button where you can all be muted. Thank you. So now we are moving into the realm of, well, discourse analysis and pragmatics. Here's a nice communicative exchange taken from Blakemore's Understanding Utterances within the context of relevance theory. "Did you enjoy your holiday?" A asks. And B replies, "The beaches were crowded and the hotel was full of bugs." So, of course, A understands that B wanted to convey that no, she didn't enjoy her holiday. But she didn't say it. She didn't say no. This is an implicature. This is implied. But then take someone who, let's assume B is a fan of crowded beaches and hotels full of bugs, or bug is not this insect, but a spying device, then the answer might be interpreted differently. And the implicature would be maybe yes. But it's not just these implicatures. Look at these utterances. Did you enjoy your holiday? And then the beaches were crowded. Well, which beaches? Obviously the beaches where B stayed, but it's not been made explicit. And the hotel, which hotel? The hotel where she stayed, full of bugs, the ambiguity. Well, probably these insects, but it could be other things. These are explicatures. So we have to fill in an awful lot. What we understand when we understand utterances, when we understand each other, is not given with the words and structures and intonation contours and so on we use as means of expression. We have to fill in an awful lot in terms of explicatures and implicatures. And we can only do this by making contextual assumptions, by drawing on our contextual knowledge, by drawing on our knowledge about the other speaker, and so forth. But again, we have these requirements of success. We do not process these utterances like a computer going through the rules. We might be interested in B's reply to a great extent. It's more like a small talk question, and there's a lot of noise in the background, and we only get half of it, and it's not that important. And then we may resort to strategies like let it pass. Well, wait and see. Let's see what she will mention next, and then maybe I understand better. Or we join in a co-construction. We deal with misunderstandings. So it all depends, again, on my requirements of communicative and communal success, whether I engage more deeply in these processes or more superficially. Now, from a production perspective, it is kind of interesting. I formulate my utterances, I use meaning signals, that is words and structures and intonations, in such a way that according to what I know about my partner, the partner is able to make the explicating inferences and implicating inferences I want him or her to make. That is, partner modeling is essential. Partner modeling regarding available linguistic and non-linguistic resources and the partner's inferential comprehension abilities. So inferential processing also has its place in production. And then we have something very, very interesting. And this is goes back to Heinrich von Kleist, 1805 to 1806. He talks about, in German, it's das allmählige Verfertigen der Gedanken beim Reden. In English, I found for you a translation in English. Here it is, the gradual formulation of thoughts while speaking. I think this is very, very important, in particular with regard to what we observe in global Englishes and ELF communication. We have this global Englishes performance, and ELF performance is usually described as very complex and heterogeneous and disruptive and all these things. Now look at what we do in ordinary communication. Sometimes, well, we say something, and then at the end we say, well, yes, this is what I wanted to say, but that is wrong. It's not what I wanted to say. It's rather what I said. And since I am master of my own meaning, I am authorized to say, well, this is what I wanted to say. But actually what happened was that I started with a more, that's what I'm doing right now, that I started with a more vague or general meaning intention, and I start talking, formulating, and what I say kind of feeds back into these processes and shapes what I'm going to say next. And so it goes on and on. And this is not just the case in oral communication, it's also the same in written communication. Only in written communication it may look neater, but this is only the case when we look at the polished end result. But when we look at the developmental process of writing, then we have something similar. So in ordinary communication, the surface of performance is very heterogeneous and complex and convoluted, and yet we are able to understand each other. And this is because of this inferential discourse processing, and it is because of cooperativity and empathetic rapport. Just take this example from Widdowson. That's the phone, and B replies, I'm in the bath, and A says, okay. So we all understand what's going on here, and it seems to go smoothly. But imagine that the chemistry between the two people were wrong for some reason. In that case, the communication would go smoothly. Cooperativity, that is the assumption of cooperativity and being cooperative, but maybe even more the assumption of cooperativity, is very powerful and very essential. And if cooperativity is not given between communication partners, yeah, you can almost forget it. Okay, there's misunderstandings all over the place. You can't communicate about the simplest things anymore. And cooperativity, as I said before, is greatly enhanced by empathetic empathy, by empathetic rapport. Empathy and these other features of openness, flexibility of behavior, tolerance for ambiguity, all these things were first more explicitly mentioned by Mike Byron in 1970 in connection with intercultural communicative competence. But I would like to emphasize here, and that's why I put intercultural here in brackets and in blue and not in red. All these features, empathy, rapport, openness, flexibility of behavior, and so forth, are equally essential for ordinary communication. In case you have any doubts regarding whether ordinary communicative competence works under GEL conditions, I would like to give you an example which is not taken from Global English's communication, but I think it serves to make the point. According to research at an English university, it doesn't matter in what order the letters in a word are. The only important thing is that the first and last letter is in the right place. It really works. So here you have an utterance, text, which is, yeah, not straightforward, which is broken in many ways and odd in many ways. And yet it is possible for us to understand it. Okay, that is, when we make use of our ordinary communicative capability along the lines which I very briefly sketched out, we are able to cope with the challenges presented by global Englishes and ELF communication. It's just that these things are not dealt with in the ELT classroom. Okay, so the ELT classroom, English language teaching, in order to make students fit for global English's communication, all these quality features of communicative, ordinary communicative capability would have to be activated, or let's maybe say reactivated. Okay. So this was the first point I wanted to make, that communicating under global Englishes and ELF conditions is grounded in ordinary communication. And as teachers, we should take this grounding seriously. Teaching for global English's communication is grounded in how we acquire languages. And with this, I come to my second section here. The way we understand communication and language learning, ordinary communication and ordinary language learning, shapes our understanding of language teaching. And my argument is that, sadly enough, in ELT, teachers' understanding of ordinary communication and language learning is very, very restricted. And this explains why their teaching is very restricted. And this explains why their teaching leads to a kind of competence that is not in line with the challenges of global Englishes and ELF communication. Okay, now very briefly about acquiring the language taught in ELT. Okay, we said the language taught is some kind of standard English. That is the case around the world. And the question is this a problem? And now we try to find an answer to this question. And it all centers around this question of how do we acquire a language? How do we acquire the language taught in ELT? How do we acquire the standard English taught in ELT? Well, from a social constructivist perspective, speaker learners acquire the language taught in ELT by creating their own version of it in their minds, in their hearts, and in their behavior. This is not an option. This is the way it is for us human beings. We can only acquire the target language by creating our own version of it. This is inevitable. And treating language learning as if it were a copying or cloning process goes entirely wrong and, well, in a way does injustice to the learners. But this is not an idiosyncratic process, just in my mind, in my heart, in my behavior. No, all this takes place through communication and communication practices and in cooperation with others. That is, this process of making the target language my own is influenced by both individual and social shaping forces. And it is guided by my own requirements of communicative and communal success. So here is where the requirements come in again. And the result is what I call, well, my language, my English. You can apply this to other foreign languages as well. It's not limited to learning English. And my English, my language can, to bridge over to the translanguaging pedagogy I briefly mentioned at the beginning, can be, and I think should be, seen as a translanguaging repertoire. Translanguaging does not only come in when we move across different so-called named languages, but within my own English. I can be more formal, I can be less formal or casual, or I can be boldly creative. There's a whole variety. And I think from a teaching perspective, again, it is quite interesting to look at students' my English as a translanguaging repertoire and to make them aware of this. Okay, there are shaping forces behind the development of my English. Here are the usual suspects. I mean, where do speaker learners come from? Of course, my English has a German touch, and some of yours has an Ukrainian touch, others an Italian touch, and who knows who else is here in the Zoom room. And that's fine. That's the way it is. Okay. It's also shaped by what do they do in terms of learning approach, attitudes, motivation, effort invested, and all these things. And it is, of course, shaped by what they are exposed to. This is where the material, the textbooks come in, and whom they are exposed to. Teachers, partners, and so forth. As I said, these are the usual suspects. And here we have a fourth force, which is of crucial importance, namely, who do they want to be in English? And this is again where their personal requirements of communicative and communal success come in. Okay, and we have this speaker internal perspective and speaker satisfaction. Who is it they want to be? Now, this my English perspective has certain implications for teaching English or any other language, as I said. Initially, we asked, well, what is it that goes wrong or might go wrong in ELT? Mind you, not in all ELT classroom. It depends on you as the teachers. And now we come closer, we get closer to answer this question. From the my English perspective, I would argue it is essential to change the ELT approach from the usual strict target language orientation, which is a quasi-behavioristic, although nobody wants to have anything to do with behaviorism anymore, but still a quasi-behavioristic copying and cloning view. From a strict target language orientation to an open social constructivist my English orientation, which leaves room for speaker learners to make English their own while drawing on all their translanguaging resources, to trust their creativity as emancipated or soon to be emancipated non-native speakers of English, and to aim for speaker satisfaction guided by their personal requirements of communicative and communal success. Taking these things seriously implies taking students serious as agents of their own learning, Now, against this backdrop, what does it imply for ELT's standard English orientation? Well, there is, many years ago, I wrote an article with this nice title, ELF and the Standard English Misunderstanding. There's actually a misunderstanding. The problem is not standard English as the language taught, is not standard English as such. Rather, the crucial question is what speaker learners are allowed, encouraged, and supported to do with it. That's the point. So there's nothing wrong with having a standard English orientation in the classroom. But there can be everything wrong with what you allow your students and encourage your students and support your students to do with this standard English. That is, they need room to develop their own version of it, their own My English standard English. It is important to acknowledge and respect speaker learners' own resources and requirements of success. They should be able to like what they see in the mirror. And this has everything to do with identity. Speaking and learning a language is about identity. And this brings me to this quote, which I mentioned in the abstract, taken from this Asian English's article. The emancipatory project of global English's ELF pedagogy thus shifts, or I could add here, needs to shift from liberating speaker learners from standard English. That is a position which you find quite solidly in the literature. Shift from liberating speaker learners from standard English to empowering them to make it their own, It is their social constructivist capability of My English communication and learning that incorporates the possibility of non-native speaker emancipation. And this is not a matter of higher proficiency or lower proficiency. So this is rather a pedagogical attitude which is needed all the way through, right from the start. And maybe a few quick words on how this could be done. Of course, it's always easy to talk about these things, but then what do you do in the classroom? And I am not a practitioner, I'm a researcher, but I have some practice through European projects. And in our projects, we developed what we call an immersive pedagogical lingua franca approach, which is a kind of extension of communicative language teaching. It goes a step further. CLT 4.0, so to speak. An immersive pedagogical lingua franca approach. This involves ELT students, your classroom students, together with others, so that you have students of different linguacultural backgrounds who communicate with each other using their My English repertoire or repertoires as a pedagogical lingua franca. That is, you create conditions for your students to communicate under Global English's ELF conditions with other speakers, using their My English as a kind of global English or or ELF. And I think it is, I would always start with this. I would not start with, well, lecturing first about ELF communication out there. Of course, you need to make them aware of these issues and these problems. But then very, very soon, it is very important to give them opportunities to do it, to become immersed in GE-ELF communication themselves. And why pedagogical? Well, first, it takes place in a pedagogical environment in connection with your classroom. But how can you do it? Well, this is where modern technologies come in, like what we are doing now. You can use video conferencing. You can use, well, in our project, we had a virtual world, or you use Padlet, or you use chat, or you could use email. But the important point is that you get them in touch with each other for real exchanges, preferably in small groups or pairs, and preferably outside class, preferably from home. I mean, it never really worked in our projects when teachers took their students to the computer room and did it from there as an entire group. Just, there's not enough communicative privacy. It's, yeah. The school atmosphere is too strong. We found that you need accessible topics, like talking about breakfast, waste avoidance, interesting sport, fashion. These were the things we used. And well, there can be pedagogical translanguaging in the sense of sandwiching. You could help your students, in particular when you do it in a Padlet environment. We have examples of tasks developed in our TESOL project. You find these things on the website. There's a new project now, eLive project, which is a kind of follow-up to TESOL, and it's in its first stages. But if you are interested, you can join and maybe make use of the infrastructure available there in order to get in touch with, or bring your students in touch with other students around Europe, around the world. So these are the resources here. The benefits are obvious. Well, I would say by saying the students are in the same boat, and many of them told us so. I think this captures it all. They are in the same boat. It feels authentic. They collaborate. They develop a shared transcultural ground. They notice problems, cognitive, emotional, behavioral divergences, and try to solve them. They practice communicative skills and strategic skills, accommodation, meaning, negotiation, let it pass, and experience agency, cooperativity, and so on and so forth. But, and this is another reason now for the label pedagogical, but it doesn't work just on its own. It requires pedagogical mentoring, that is helping students adopt a social constructivist perspective and feeling responsible for their own English development. They need to be aware of the relevance of requirements of success, and that it's necessary, maybe necessary, to negotiate them with their partners, with their teachers. Practice across and beyond their My English repertoire, that is, stretch their limits. This is where creativity comes in. Appreciate the value, develop a sense for cooperativity and empathetic rapport, and practice monitoring for successful communication and learning. And here we notice something very interesting, that all our students in these exchanges, they monitor their communicative performance, but very much in the way they would do it in everyday life. That is, you don't always interrupt when you don't understand, and maybe there are also issues of politeness, in particular if you have people from different cultures meeting up with each other. So it's important to make students aware of the learning value of communication monitoring. The less you monitor your own performance, the fewer are your learning opportunities. And the more you monitor, the more learning opportunities you create. So you need to go beyond these things. And this is what I call augmented communication monitoring. Okay, I think this should be it for tonight. Thank you very much. And I would be glad if you, and happy if you still have questions, and if we still have a bit of time for questions.
Thank you.
Very much. And maybe one remark before I go back, I disconnect from the slides. You have my email here. Those of you who feel interested in discussing these things further, as I said at the beginning, I always like to communicate about these things, and so please feel free to get in touch, and we can take things from there. Okay, so with this I stop the sharing. And
thank you, Professor Kohn, for your inspiring presentation. A lot of comments, positive feedback, amazing, motivating, inspiring. I would ask maybe some participants if they want to ask you some questions. Lucilla said bravissimo in Italian, so you know the atmosphere is, we are all really impressed by your presentation. Yeah, my reaction.
So feel free to come in with your comments. I mean, do you feel this convincing, this shift from looking at, I mean, sometimes I have the feeling that, I mean, when as I said, I'm not a teacher, but I mean, many teachers have done a lot of teacher training workshops and so on and so forth. And my own students at the university, when I started with these things, I don't know, I mean, 15 years ago, at the beginning, it was difficult. And I had to talk quite a lot to convince them that this was not about teaching incorrect English. Okay, and this is something I have the feeling many teachers might get this impression when they read how ELF pedagogy, GE-ELF, Global English is pedagogy, how these things are dealt with in the literature. I might be wrong, but I think it's very, very important to emphasize that this is not about incorrect English. It is not about letting go of standard English. I mean, we all have a standard English orientation, but at the same time, we all have made it our own, right? My standard English is different from yours, so it's kind of idiosyncratic, but it's not arbitrary, because this is shaped through communication and through communicative and communal cooperation with others. And I think this is important to somehow get across to ELT and implement in your ELT practices. And sometimes I have the feeling, I mean, of something very modest. I mean, don't do too much, some very modest things, and then a little bit of tweaking, and it makes a big difference. Yeah. The crucial thing is exposing or immersing students and immersing yourselves as teachers. I mean, this is what we notice in our project. We didn't discuss with our teachers much about ELF and global Englishes. They didn't have the time, and they didn't want to be told, to be quite honest, and we would have lost them. No, we immersed them with their students in this situation, and even teachers who were first skeptical concerning this, what we called lingua franca condition, who would have liked to do a tandem with native speakers, of course, but then it turned out to be difficult to organize a tandem. There aren't that many English native speakers for all these tandem constellations. And then through their immersive experience with the lingua franca condition, they became convinced that this is the way to go.
There are a lot of comments. I was really impressed by Olena said, "What million thanks. That is what we need, a modern, fresh look at language teaching. My English, just great." Or even Marina, maybe you can ask, say directly what you have written in the chat about this revolutionary teaching approach that you would like, we would like to use and adopt in the classroom. I mean, because it's just something we need, in our classroom.
Maria Grazia, which Marina are you addressing? Marina? You.
Marina. Sorry, I addressed
my friend from
Marina, my Ukrainian sister.
Okay.
Say something, of course. You are my other sister, Italian one. So.
All right. Okay, so I give her the mic.
Yeah, okay. It's
Can I ask you a question?
Yes, please.
Just Professor Kohn, somewhere at the very beginning of our chat, of our presentation webinar, there was a comment in the chat from Roberto Di Scala. He wrote, "Yes, the problem is that traditional textbooks are always focused on standard English and they make no hints at global English and ELF. And basically, I abolish textbooks in my classes." What do you think of this? Abolishing traditional textbooks that really are oriented at standard English. Don't you think that we as EFL teachers might lose that beacon you were talking of?
Yeah, no, I wouldn't abolish textbooks, but they certainly have to. I mean, Lucilla has a lot to say on these things. Did quite a lot of research on textbooks. I mean, of course, textbooks need to be adapted to these new challenges, and it's only when you look at in what respect textbooks should need to be changed and further developed, I think there are mainly, let's say, 3 dimensions I would like to mention. One is the general cultural or transcultural one. And you have a little bit in our textbooks in Germany that maybe a German scholar, a German student is visiting in England or in the States or the other way around. But that is almost where it stops. And we would need a more open open scenarios involving other cultural elements of English communication. So this kind of thing, so that we do not all the time rub in this one and only focus on native speakers and countries and these things. The other point regarding standard English, I think here it is very important to distinguish between comprehension, what is needed for comprehension practice, and what is needed for production practice. And this is, generally, it's not attended to, this distinction, but it's of course quite obvious, and for every teacher it's obvious. For comprehension practice, you need a wide variety of Englishes so that students can practice dealing with these things. That is not only becoming more familiar with, say, Indian English, but also for fine-tuning their communicative capability, their inferential powers, their creativity in order to bridge gaps and all these things. So this needs to be practiced. And but with regard to developing one's own, that is the student's production skills, I would argue it is quite different. And you remember this quote where it said, we need a rich variety of language models. Now, maybe they mean model in a different sense, but model for me is a model. And Indian English, or I don't know, some kind of English, should it be a model for our students' production, development of their production repertoire? I would say no. I would say no. The model is, well, the model everybody in this educational context agrees on. It is some kind of standard English, and it is a pedagogically mediated standard English. I mean, in Germany, all our teachers are German native speakers. So quite obviously when they speak English, it's standard English, but it's this German standard English. And in the textbooks, of course, you need to break things down and simplify things. So there's a lot of pedagogical mediation of this kind of standard English, but it's this kind of standard English. And then the normative issue does not come in with whether you select a standard English as a target language or as a language taught, but it comes in connection with what you allow and enable and support your students do with it. That is the point. And of course, it's not an easy decision. And I think in order to maybe get a better grip on these things, it is important to, I don't know what your take on this is, but for me, pedagogy is eclectic. Horses for courses, right? So there are phases in the classroom where, well, where I want them to learn certain things, where I want them to get the tenses right, and where there is a bloody test and they need to get it right in order to get their scores. But then there are phases where the focus is a different one, and yet another different one. And there is one where in an ELF Global Englishes encounter, where the important thing is that I can see that they make best use of all their communicative capability, all their inferencing capabilities, their creativity, their strategic skills, and so forth, their cooperativity and empathy and all these things. And this again is something which can be assessed. Then it's difficult to assess, but it's a different kind of assessment. So I don't think with not only learning and teaching, but also with regard to assessment, it's horses for courses. There is not just this one type of assessment, and saying that for a certain learning purpose, it is essential to focus on these intercultural communication, on global Englishes communication issues we talked about, and activating one's communicative capability and so on and so forth. This does not mean that we have to cramp all this into one coherent assessment concept. So assessment can be this and assessment can be that. And yeah, so I think this is also important to keep in mind. So it's and regarding textbooks, so the cultural, transcultural richness is very important, and is of course important regarding authenticity, or Widdowson's term, as you may know, authentication, making that I am able to make it authentic for myself, for me as a speaker learner. But then this distinction between comprehension and production. And then this idea of horses for courses pedagogy, eclecticism. Yeah. And I think this solves or unravels a lot of these convoluted problems we encounter in these discussions, or in these debates, these struggles about global Englishes and English as a lingua franca, and whether it should be and in what ways it should have an impact on ELT. Definitely ELT needs to change, needs to open. But interestingly enough, when you look at the issues I mentioned regarding normalizing and looking at communication and communicative capability and how languages are learned, I mean, this is true regardless of whether I teach towards ELF communication or not. Okay, so this concerns the very, very basis of teaching. Teachers need to know more about how communication works, how learning works. Okay, and depending on, the way they are trained, they don't know this. I mean, just teaching, that's just taking the German case. I mean, studying English at a university doesn't necessarily give you these things. Studying linguistics doesn't necessarily give you these things. Studying applied linguistics doesn't necessarily give you these things. I mean, I talked about these things with my students, and these were obligatory topics for them. But wow, but that was my preference. So this would need to be embedded in teacher training, teacher education in a more central way, and continuous teacher education. I think there is also the situation different in different countries regarding continuous teacher education. In Germany, I have the feeling that we have a very sort of modest sort of teacher education, continuous teacher education is more focused on well, new things coming up in connection with assessment and tests and standards and so on and so forth and procedures. But learning about communication and learning about learning, all the things that have happened in applied linguistics over the past 30, 40 years, only enter teacher education in a more sporadic, almost arbitrary fashion, I have the feeling. But that is as an old man speaking.
Thank you very much. And just all this extends our horizons, I would say. Last time we were talking about how to bridge ESP teaching and EMI teaching, that is English medium instruction.
Yes.
Just I guess that next time you agree to make a webinar, we should invite EMI teachers so that they could listen to this, just because they really use English as a lingua franca while they are teaching their specialist subjects, and not always they know how to approach this and just
Yes.
what to do and how to do it. So
Yes.
just really this is what rings special bell for ESP teachers and just for EMI teachers. So thank you.
That's right. Thank you. Yeah.
Any more questions? Okay, if there aren't any more questions, thank you again, Professor Kohn, for your talk. A lot of food for thought.
Yeah, my
sorry.
pleasure. And and as I said, I mean, please, whoever feels like it, please get in touch, and we can pick up things from here, or also in connection with this eLife project, if you
For
wanted
sure.
to.
Marina, I would just like to remind that on Thursday there is a wonderful trio of speakers for the 8th webinar. Do you want to say something about?
Yeah, so as thank you, Maria Grazia, and as we're planning that will be the last Ukrainian part of this project, because we'll have one more bonus webinar next Tuesday, like the 9th one, and for this 4th Ukrainian webinar, we wanted to showcase like our president, me as vice president, and Lilia Kuznetsova as our treasurer. Yes, so Elena Ilyenko, our president, will tell about teacher development institutes as our TESOL Ukraine. I don't think it's an innovation, but that's our specific feature. That's what we do, and we'll be sharing with you the context and the outcomes and some content of the last Teacher Development Institute that we had. So there will be some touching stories about the war, but also there will that will be the context, but there will be some content, and we'll share with you what we know about teaching kids who belong to generation Z and Alpha, so meaning that they process the information differently. Yeah. So please join us on Thursday here for the 8th webinar. And thank you, Professor Kohn. That was a great webinar.
Thank you. Thank you. My pleasure.
So that's it, yeah?
Yeah, so let's meet on Thursday.
Yeah, let's meet on Thursday, and have a nice productive week, and we'll see you on Thursday for generations Z and Alpha. Yeah, so bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Have a nice evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you, you too, bye.
Thank you, goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.